There are topics that one does not speak about, truths that are forbidden to reveal, and knowledge that can shake everything we're used to believing. Imagine a scientist who has trusted in a rational explanation of phenomena his entire life, but one day is confronted with something beyond scientific understanding. What if death is not an end at all? What if something happens beyond our world that could change the very notion of reality itself? Eben Alexander, a respected neurosurgeon, a man of science who always trusted only the facts. Yet one day, he experienced death. His brain was completely shut down. There was no chance of survival. But he came back, bringing with him knowledge that doesn't fit into the familiar worldview. He saw things that cannot be explained. He encountered beings that no one talks about. And most importantly, he learned things that we are not meant to know. Why is his story forbidden? Who is trying to silence him? And above all, why should you be prepared for this? Stay until the end. This narrative will change your view of reality. His whole life, he trusted science. As an experienced neurosurgeon, he knew how the brain worked and was convinced that consciousness was just the result of biochemical processes. He performed the most complicated surgeries and was always skeptical of patient stories about near-death experiences. But one day, his own experience destroyed all his beliefs. On the 10th of November, 2008, early in the morning, Eben woke up with an inexplicable feeling. Suddenly, a piercing pain in his back. He tried to get up, but his body seemed unwilling to obey him. Something was wrong. He tried to convince himself that it was just a temporary discomfort, maybe a pinched nerve. But the pain only grew stronger. His muscles stopped obeying him. The movements became alien. His wife, who heard his heavy breathing, grew concerned and suggested calling an ambulance, but Eben refused. Doctors don't like to be patients. But within a few hours, the situation dramatically worsened. Cramps seized his body. He thrashed back and forth on the stretcher, making sounds that didn't seem human. Colleagues, experienced doctors, could only helplessly watch. And suddenly, he screamed, "God, help me!" No one had expected these words from staunch skeptic. Then he plunged into darkness. Coma. The diagnosis was terrifying, a rare and aggressive form of bacterial meningitis, rapidly destroying his body by attacking the brain tissue. With every hour, his chances of survival shrank. The temperature reached a critical point, and the once clear and precise neural connections disintegrated, turning into a chaotic flow of biological reactions. The world of science, to which he had dedicated his entire life, was powerless. Antibiotics didn't help. The doctors, who had recently worked with him, could only helplessly stare at the monitors and watch as his consciousness faded. The centers responsible for thinking, logic, and analysis were completely shut down. From a medical perspective, he could neither dream, perceive himself, nor hallucinate. His brain was practically dead. But Eben's consciousness did not fade. He existed. He perceived himself, but without a name, without memories, without any reference to the past, or even to the fact of his own existence. There was only endless darkness, dense, thick, all-consuming. He did not see his body from the outside. He did not hover over the operating room like many who had experienced clinical death had described. There was no tunnel with light on the horizon. No voices of relatives or angels, just the absolute vacuum. Even the concept of time had disappeared. But then a feeling came. He understood that he was in something. The darkness had boundaries. It was a bottomless abyss, without walls, without a floor, but he was at its center. The space around him was viscous, as if made of thick, black earth, pressing from all sides. And then faces began to emerge from the darkness. They suddenly appeared, seeming to rise from the emptiness for a moment. Human, distorted features shifted, some recognizable, others horribly twisted, like reflections in a shattered mirror. They opened their mouths in a silent scream, then vanished, leaving only the feeling of icy fear. Who were they? Living? Dead? Lost souls? He didn't know, but fear was not present. Not because he was brave, but because fear simply did not exist here. It seemed to him that he had always been here, as if nothing else had ever existed. No past, no life, no earth. He was just a part of this endless abyss. How much time had passed? Minutes? Hours? An eternity? There was no time here. And suddenly, something changed. He felt a light nudge, as if an invisible force gently prodded him from within. And then, for the first time since being in this place, a question flickered in his consciousness. What if I'm not supposed to stay here? He hadn't even thought to ask himself a question before. But as soon as this thought arose, the world around him began to change. Deep within the endless black abyss, something new flickered. A spot of light. It did not shine, it did not blind, but within it was a strange, inexplicable hope. It flickered on and faded again. It was not just light. It was movement, a thought, a wish, an essence calling to him. The abyss trembled, contracted, as if something were trying to hold him and not let him go. But he no longer wanted to stay. He reached out toward the light, and he broke through. He found himself in a completely different world. The world was so bright, so alive, that his consciousness struggled to comprehend it. The first thing he felt was amazement. Instead of the gloomy abyss, endless green meadows stretched before him. The grass swayed gently, shimmering in 1,000 colors, and the space around him was filled with a golden glow. But the most astonishing thing was that the light came neither from the sun nor from any other source. It was simply there. It filled everything around him. And this was only the beginning. The forests around him were so dense and infinite that it seemed as if more was hidden behind their crowns than just trees. Waterfalls cascaded down, but the water did not break into millions of drops. It flowed like liquid light, creating music that could not be heard with the ears, but felt with the soul. Eben flew, but it was not flight in the usual sense. There was no gravity, no air resistance. He simply moved at will, and with every moment, new horizons opened before him, majestic, endless, and he began to realize, this is not a dream, not an illusion. It is the reality beyond the known universe. And suddenly, he saw her. She had always been there, but his mind had only just focused, allowing her image to appear. A young woman was moving toward him, her eyes, deep, glowing, filled with an inner light that was not simply reflected. Her hair, long, dark, shimmering with a soft glow, as if it had been woven from the fabric of this world itself. But the most astonishing thing was that she spoke to him without uttering a word. "You are safe. Do not be afraid." Her voice was not audible in the space. It was simply within him, like a warm stream of light surrounding his soul. And in that moment, Eben understood she knew him better than he knew himself. It was no random meeting. She was his guide, but not just a figure of direction. Her presence meant more to him. It was personal, important. She extended her hand to him, but he did not feel the usual touch. Instead, a gentle, pulsating flow of energy passed through him, alive, meaningful, full of love and understanding. And they moved on. Around them, gently glowing spheres floated. Some radiated brighter than the sun. Others glowed with a soft, barely noticeable light. They moved chaotically, but in this chaos, harmony could be felt, as if each one knew its exact place and purpose. It suddenly became clear to Eben. He was not just an observer. He felt their presence, their essence. They were alive, not just light, not just images. They were beings filled with wisdom, knowledge, infinite understanding. They knew everything, all the answers, all the questions he had ever asked. But the most astonishing thing was, he understood that they had always existed. They were not the souls of the deceased. They were beings of a higher order. Angels? Spirits? Messengers? Words had no meaning. He simply knew they were more than any human could ever comprehend. And suddenly, a flash. Realization. This world was not the only one. Before his inner eye, entire universes flickered. Thousands. Millions. Countless worlds. Each unique. Each filled with life. Life in countless forms, in innumerable manifestations, beyond human imagination. And in all these worlds, there was light and darkness. For without these, there is no free will. Evil was not a curse. It It was part of the grand plan, a force that left rational beings with a choice. The possibility to grow. Eben almost understood it. Almost. But at that moment, something changed. A feeling, as though he was being pulled back. The image before his eyes began to blur. He turned toward the woman. She was still looking at him. She smiled, and without saying a word, she transmitted the final message. You must return. And everything disappeared. He was back in the same dark abyss. The mud around him seemed to come alive, flowing and enveloping him with a heavy, sticky mist. He couldn't move, but for the first time, he felt fear. He didn't want to stay here. Everything that had brought lightness, freedom, and the incredible beauty of that other world had vanished. Now he was bound to something cold, heavy, and infinitely empty. And then he heard a sound, a voice, a dull echo, like the thunderous roar of a storm, breaking the silence. It was the call of reality, pulling him back. Suddenly, a jolt. He felt a push, as if someone had suddenly yanked him out of this sticky nightmare. And in the next moment, he was blinded by bright light. He opened his eyes. At first, there was only a blurry veil in front of him. He couldn't make out a single clear image. The light pressed on his eyelids. His head was empty, and the sound around him were a dull rumble, like a distant storm. But gradually, the image began to take shape. He saw faces, people standing around him, leaning over him. Their eyes were full of concern and worry. But he didn't know who these people were. Whose faces were these? Why were they staring at him so intently? He tried to speak, but from his throat came only a weak, hoarse sound. Panic overtook him. Where is he? Who was he? He turned around. His heart pounded wildly. Something was wrong. He remembered nothing. The only things that stayed in his memory were the impressions from another world. Flights between glowing spheres. A woman with blue eyes. Waterfalls of liquid light. But here in this hospital room, none of that existed. Instead of angels, doctors. Instead of warm light, cold lamps on the ceiling. Instead of endless peace, the feeling of being lost in this reality. He didn't recognize these people, but he felt like he should know them. Minutes passed, and only then did his brain slowly begin to restore memories, as though breaking through thick fog. And he understood. He had returned. But something was wrong. A lot of time had passed. Every day, he tried to understand what had happened. His scientific mind demanded a logical explanation. But the facts were relentless. Fact number one, his neocortex had been shut down. This meant he could neither see nor be aware or have meaningful hallucinations. Fact number two, his brain hadn't been functioning during this time, but his consciousness had continued to exist separately. What was this? A dream? But then, who was this woman? And above all, how did she know who he was? What if consciousness is not bound to the brain, but merely uses it as a tool? Then death is not the end, but merely a transition. Eben Alexander, several months after waking from the coma, tried to return to his usual life. But something inside him had changed. He began to see the world with different eyes. Every detail, from the breeze to the reflection of the sun on the water, to the rustling of the leaves, seemed to be part of something greater. He felt the constant presence of an invisible reality, the one he had seen beyond life. Yet his most important question remained unresolved. Who was the woman with the blue eyes? Why had she been the one to meet him in the other world? Why did he feel such a strong connection to her, as if he had known her his whole life? The answer came unexpectedly. One day, while rummaging through archived documents of his life, he remembered his biological parents. Childhood questions arose. Who were his real mother and father? Why had they left him? Were they still alive? This thought wouldn't leave him, and he began to search. Many hours of research, archival inquiries, conversations with people who might know something, and a gradual restoration of fragments of the past. And finally, he found the truth. He had a biological sister, but she was no longer alive. She had passed away in 1998. This shook him, but it wasn't the strongest blow yet. When he saw her photo, the world around him seemed to stand still. His heart stopped. He looked at the picture, and at that moment, every puzzle piece came together. It was her, the woman with the blue eyes, exactly the one who had met him in the other world. She wasn't a creation, not a product of his subconscious, not an illusion of the dying brain. She was real. This moment was a shock that also brought enlightenment. Up until that point, Eben had doubted, trying to find a rational explanation for what he had experienced. But now he knew the truth. It wasn't a dream, not a hallucination, not a trick of the mind. He had truly been there, and he had truly met her. That meant one thing. Consciousness does not die with the body. Life does not end with death. This moment became a turning point for Eben. He could no longer ignore the obvious. Everything he knew, his years of scientific research, his entire career, they shattered in the face of this undeniable fact. Consciousness is not simply a byproduct of neuronal activity. It exists beyond the physical body. This discovery changed his perspective forever. On life, on death, on the nature of reality. For the first time in his life, he understood we are not just bodies. We're not just biological machines. Our life is only the beginning of a journey. And so, Eben continued his life, but with a new depth of consciousness. He understood that what we consider the end is actually just a new beginning. He began to appreciate every moment more, every breath, and every step. And even after all his scientific achievements, he remained open to new, unexpected truths that could change our perception of the world. So, friends, stay healthy. Remember that life is a great gift, and even in the darkest moments, light can appear. Don't be afraid to ask questions, seek answers, and discover new horizons. If you enjoyed this story, give it a thumbs up, leave comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any new, interesting stories. Take care of yourselves, and see you next time.